Okay, hello TFC tennis friends, family, and anyone else who might have stumbled across this video and is listening with curiosity. My name is Ruth, and I'm here with Nick Holt and David O'Hare, and we love tennis, and we are also foot nerds with the Foot Collective. And so we are so excited because we have a guest. Nick Holt and I are foot nerds who are trying to, for ourselves, stay healthy and pain-free and injury-free for as much of the time as we can, for as long as we can, so we can chase fuzzy little yellow tennis balls around the court for as long as we can. And we want to try to help our tennis communities do the same, because a healthy, vital, pain-free and injury tennis community is our dream. So I wanted to just give a brief introduction on why we are having the Foot Collective tennis talks. We think that there might be, that we could help keep ourselves and our tennis communities healthier and pain-free as long as possible by addressing a conversation that we don't hear talked about very often, and that is the role of our feet and our footwear and the amount of time we spend at any level that you play, sitting in a chair position. On top of that, we underestimate the demands of our sport because, as any person who's addicted to tennis will attest, that there's something about tennis that makes you feel like a child playing again. It drums up all these great feelings of competition. There's so much to explore physically, mentally, emotionally, I would argue spiritually, on every level that tennis creates in our lives. So I wanted to first have Dave introduce himself so I don't go on gushing about who he is, but he is not only a player, and a coach, and also he is a graduated foot nerd from the Foot Nerd program in July 2021. So we're so excited to have him here to talk with us. And Nick Holt is also a foot nerd and a tennis player, and we all love tennis and we're foot nerds. So maybe Dave, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of background about who you are and why you ever started the Foot Nerd program in the first place.
Okay, well, yeah, where to start? Well, so yeah, current ATP doubles coach. I'm traveling with Salisbury and Rajeev Ram. So they're the #2 ranked doubles team in the world right now. So Joe was actually a former teammate of mine. I went to college at the University of Memphis, and then we turned pro together. I reached a career high ranking of 117 in the world, and then actually due to injury had to stop. So that was January 18, and then subsequently found my way kind of into coaching then. But during COVID was really when I started to get, and I thought my playing days were done. Actually, I'm back representing Ireland in Davis Cup, but really testament to the Foot Collective and to the Foot Nerd program was, you know, what found me back on court and healthy and trusting my ankle and not needing ankle braces. So yeah, represented Ireland last year. Past 2 years, unfortunately, I missed out the tide recently, just kind of 10 days ago in Peru, just because I was committed down in Australia with the guys that I coach. So always had a keen interest in high performance, I suppose. I studied health and human performance and sports science at university, and had I not kind of taken the tennis as serious as I had, I probably would have tried to gone into physiotherapy or osteopathy or, you know, something along those lines. So just kind of naturally curious, I suppose, which is maybe one trait that most people in the Foot Nerd program have. And yeah, just taking ownership of my health, I think, is one testament to the program. I think you have to be curious and go out and find what's best for you. I think health is, you know, we're not all in one paradigm. We have to try and figure out what suits yourself best. And thankfully enough, that led me to the Foot Nerd program and really enjoyed it, and have been on the beam more or less ever since. You know, I kind of start my day with 15 minutes on it, and it's a great way for me to just warm the body up and to connect with my breath, and it's a bit of fun, and yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
So even past the Foot Nerd program ending, you spend 15 minutes a day on your beam?
Yeah, try to do 15 minutes on the beam and then 15 minutes of yoga. So I've kind of like a little 5-minute cycle that I rotate through, which was through a few of the different poses.
Nice.
So
have you gotten Joe or Rajeev on the beam? Or what's
so
feedback
Sonny,
there?
Sonny, who is also a Foot Nerd graduate, Sonny Moon, she is based in San Francisco, and Rajeev has done a decent bit of work, just unbeknownst to me, really. And yeah, so he's been on the beam. Joe has tried it out. I mean, a lot of people, I've even had Novak Djokovic's physio come up to me and kind of share an interest, and yeah, I've been very fortunate. You know, I guess we can maybe talk a little bit later about a few anecdotes, and you know, obviously we're here to talk about tennis shoes and yeah, a few stories that I've had with Joe. And I think there's maybe, I think what Nick touched on in his previous 2 conversations with you, Ruth, and just the transition and where that may lead. But I've had, I guess I'll wait for maybe later we can get to it, but my own thoughts at maybe implementing how barefoot could maybe lead to better movement patterns and movement efficiencies in the sport. And yeah, I can share 1 or 2 stories through my career where that might have been an example.
Well, that'd be great. Nick, maybe you can just introduce yourself, since you and Dave haven't really gotten to know each other a little bit, and tell him a little bit about who you are, your background, and such like that.
Yeah. I'd love to hear those inside tennis stories. So looking forward to that. So I'm a recreational tennis player. I probably play at the maybe 4.5, 5.0 level. I played my first ITF tournament a few weeks ago, Mexico City, which was awesome. I grew up playing kind of juniors, and then I got recruited to play college basketball, and then a bad American football injury kind of led me to not pursuing sports. And I got into the finance world for about 5 years, sitting at a desk, sort of athlete inside of me, sort of dying a slow death. And then I moved to Costa Rica about 12 years ago. So, and then I started a personal training business. Now I'm a health coach. I do a lot of sort of health coaching. I still work with people in person, and I do teach a little bit of tennis, and I play, a few times a week. But I just love it. Yeah, I love tennis. And then Ruth and I I found the Foot Collective a couple of years ago. Actually reached out to Nick before he had sort of created the program, just to try to fix some ankle issues. Just, numerous ankle sprains over the years. And I felt like my range of motion in my ankles were really limited, knee problems, back problems, kind of the standard protocol with stiff ankles. And so I reached out to Nick, and we did an assessment, and that's how I found the Foot Collective, and then went through the training maybe 6-8 months ago, and just Ruth and I sort of connected, and we just have this shared passion for tennis, and we just feel like there's such a huge opportunity to help tennis players at all levels, really, to get out of pain, to be able to play, pain-free, to be able to play better, longer. And so that's kind of that's our mission here. And I think, for me at my level, I think there's probably different issues than maybe for Ruth at her level, and then for you and the guys that you work with. So it would be beautiful to kind of understand sort of all these different sort of problems that people have. And because I do think, like, after listening to the conversation with you, Ruth, and Nick the other day, it was like, wow, it was like mind blowing how nobody in this elite level is doing this stuff, right? And so, like, my part of me thinks, like, there's got to be a reason. Like, these people, like I saw Sakari on her shoes, they were like 3 inches thick, and I'm like, there's got to be a rationale for, like, why she's doing that. But then after having these conversations with people, I'm like, maybe there isn't. So I'd love to kind of, maybe we can dive into some of that stuff, but that's my quick background on how I came to be here. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think it's true, like, we're all at different levels. And one of the things that I find at my level, which is I'm a recreational player, that I've been an athlete my whole life. I played college basketball and have played sports my whole life, and background in kinesiology. And then I had an ACL reconstruction because I think I had a big history of ankle sprains in basketball. And then we tape, and we have all the ways that all the strategies that we use to combat injuries and prevent injuries. Eventually I had an ACL reconstruction, and then I stopped playing sport competitively, which I think is like in me, you know, like I want to compete. I want to, especially as a woman, it's like you're supposed to behave a certain way. And on the tennis court, it's like you get to learn how to compete kind of viciously, but you still can maintain your composure. And I miss that from sports because, I mean, for me, speaking as a woman, I don't have that outlet as readily. So now I'm 55 years old and I play in 18 and over leagues and 40 and over recreational leagues. And the players there are riddled with pain, chronic tension patterns, and injuries. And I'm somewhere in between worlds. And my story is that I came to the Foot Collective and started to really rehab and find some resolution and getting stronger and healthier with more balance. And I started to feel better. So I started playing tennis more, and then have over the last couple of years have gotten more and more involved in my tennis community. But my whole tennis journey started playing in natural footwear. So for those people listening that don't know what natural footwear are, they're tennis shoes that are foot shaped, meaning they're widest at the forefoot. They're flat as possible so that you can feel the ground, and they're super flexible. And I have never played in any other tennis shoes besides that. So what I see happening is that I feel better. I'm still trying to like work through some chronic pain, but I just am able to move around the court way better than a lot of my counterparts. And I think it's because of the shoes, because it's not that I'm more fit. It's not any of those things. In fact, I mean, it's just uncanny. So I tried to go back to a regular tennis shoe proper, a court shoe, and it hurts my knees. So that's kind of like my brief history. And so I do want to dive into all the stuff that Dave, you're talking about, and Nick. But before we do that, can I just ask the question to each of you, like, why do you love tennis? Like, what is it about tennis that you're drawn to, or that drew you and still keeps you involved? Dave?
Well, I grew up, I was the youngest of four, so I have three older siblings, and kind of grew up just watching them, and they played to an okay level, and I took it maybe a couple steps further. But to me, it's a little microcosm of life in many ways. You know, there can be all sorts of hardships, and I think the one thing that stands and maybe isn't touted enough to parents of, you know, potential future champions of tennis is just the life lessons that you can learn from the sport. You know, it is a game for life, but really you can get so well acquainted to failure, and we can learn so much about ourselves and grow a kind of resilience from that, which I think in later in life, you know, and any sort of hardships that you can face, I think it's good to have that almost exposure. You know, even when I talk to a few of my peers that maybe didn't take tennis as seriously as me, and just being exposed to that failure, how that has helped them in their, you know, working world now, if it's finance or law or whatever it may be. I think that background in tennis and has stood to them in their later life, and that's maybe something that doesn't get expressed enough, and I think it's a really good attribute. You know, I think for me as a tennis player, I failed hundreds of thousands of times, like, and I think that it's good life lessons for me. But yeah, I think it's ultimately just a lot of fun. You know, I think when I was growing up, I was just down at the tennis club playing with a few of my friends and trying to, you know, reenact some of the great shots that we've seen or the great matches, and aspiring to be one of the better players. And for a large part of my career was just, you know, stumbling over one obstacle after the other. You know, I never would have dreamt that I'd have been a Grand Slam winning coach or coaching the number 1 and 2 team in the world, or any of those achievements. So just I was talented, and it got me to become one of the better players in Ireland, and that afforded me a scholarship. And in the States is really where my tennis level probably soared to new heights, just to have the facilities and to have teammates to practice with at such a high level. And for me, I maybe naturally am in that competitive, just with how I'm made up. So that team environment, and I was very fortunate to be a captain of the Memphis team. But that was a situation that really elevated my performance, because it was all of a sudden it was much bigger than me, and it was winning for the team, and we had a lovely head coach that was just an absolute gent. So you put it all on the line for him, and that was the best for me. And I think, there's no one route to be a great tennis player or to health. I think you have to find what suits you best. And that was really it. I kind of had this amazing month where everything changed my senior year in college. Joe and I are ranked quite highly. I got a last minute call up to represent Ireland in Davis Cup, and then had an amazing experience at that. And then found myself playing against the Bryan brothers a couple of weeks later at the Memphis ATP, and holding my own. So that was a real confidence boost, to kind of go toe to toe with the best doubles team that I've ever played and lose 6-4, 6-4. That was like, God, maybe I should give this a bash and see how far I can go with it. So tennis has always been just my own little journey, and it's been fun, and it's been a real challenge. And when you talk about the challenges in every aspect, if it's not just physically, in tennis, there's waiting. You never know when your start time is, so I think in many other sports, for athletes to be ready at a certain time, and then, oh no, it went to a third set, maybe we'll get another bit of food to try and sustain energy. I think there's all sorts of these little battles that maybe gets lost, on the TV. But the reality is, you're kind of fourth on from 11, and there's 2 men's singles matches that could go best of 5, that could go 5 hours each. How do you prepare for that? And a lot of people don't think about that. So the mental strength required, and just managing that, because no one's ever really 100% ready to go out. Sometimes it can be last minute panic, God, yeah, the last match has gone so quick, we have to go get ready, so there's all these, interesting, the subtleties of the sport, not even just on the court, but outside the court, are fascinating. So to be in that world now is it's a dream come true.
That's amazing. I think that's so interesting. One of the reasons why I love tennis so much is that everything you're describing, even though I'm in the deep South in Mobile, Alabama, and I'm in this tiny little recreational community, you can relate even on the most smallest level to all of that, the way all of that.
Yeah, it's all relative, whatever nerves you feel serving out for your local championships, you can guarantee it's going to be the same nerves that my players have trying to chase their 4th or 5th Grand Slam. I think it's all like a threshold, and as soon as you've won your first ATP tournament, then that all of a sudden becomes somewhat standard, and now you're pushing for the next thrill that will kind of excite you. And maybe it's a Masters 500 or a Masters 1000, or Davis Cup, so there's all sorts of different challenges to kind of excite you in the sport. But it's absolutely one of the same to whatever you feel at your 3-5 ladies league, or your 5-0 men's league, or your first ITF tournament. It's all relative.
Yeah. How about you, Nick? What do you love about tennis so much?
Yeah, that's good stuff, Dave. Well said. Yeah, I think what Dave said, for like the first, half of what he said, as far as like the mental health stuff, I think is so relevant, because it's like, I think we have this idea that like, okay, we should be making mistakes in life, we should be failing, but like the embodiment of that is like completely different. So when you actually are going through these reps and you want to do something, you should put the ball like down the line, or you should do the smart thing, and you do the opposite. And then you have to battle that self-talk, right? That negative self-talk that isn't very pleasant. And you have to do that over and over and over. I think that really does drive up this mental resilience, mental strength that leads into so many other areas of life. So that's one big thing. And then, I think that for me, it's also this idea of just being in flow and being in the moment, and sort of getting out of my head, and just being in this, being outside in nature. I live in Costa Rica, so we can play pretty much year round. Gets a little challenging in the rainy season, but just to be out in flow and, chasing this little yellow ball, it just I get so much joy out of that. So those are the two things. I think that embodiment of like actually going through the failure and feeling that, and having to manage that self-talk, And then also just being in movement and being in flow and kind of using this beautiful gift that we have, this body, right? That to be able to experience these moments of joy and competition and growth and being pushed by others. And, tennis is a very unique sport in terms of like, you can't just run out the clock like you can in a lot of other sports, right? You actually have to finish the opponent off. And so I think there's that dynamic that's very different that like Dave was referring to, like regardless of the level, if it's if you have match point and you're serving, like you're probably going to feel those nerves, and to push through that and to be able to sort of manage those emotions and that stress. And so yeah, for all those reasons, those are my big ones.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, so I think tennis has made me a better human. I mean, hands down, 100%, I'm a better partner, I'm a better friend, I'm a better athlete, I'm a better human because of all of everything that you two have just been speaking about. For one thing, when you're an athlete your whole life and you kind of know your brain kind of thinks it knows what to do in certain situations. I got out on the court, I think we maybe had some video, and I was like, that is not what I thought my stroke looked like. That is not what I thought I was doing in my head. And then just the idea of like, you think you can do something good and then you suck at it. And then dealing with all that, well, you don't actually, like all those little mental demons. And then also emotionally, having to like deal with the nerves, like I found that like dealing with my own nerves, as I guess I'm more of an introvert than I thought I was. I mean, I practiced being more of an extroverted human my whole life in order to get by, but truthfully, I am like super private. And then to get out on the court and like you're demonstrating failure after failure on your own or with a partner. And if you're playing doubles, you feel this weird responsibility to this other human. And it's just so much emotional noise to quiet. But in the last 2 years where I've started playing more, it's just been so beautiful just to feel my own growth and satisfaction and growing peace and like calm, and all of that comes from the little failures that you're talking about on a daily basis. So I think that's why I love tennis so much, is like what you said it so well, Dave. You said it's a microcosm of life, and it's point after point after point. Like you get so many opportunities to grow, and then choosing to grow is like through those things. Like you just see all the different characters that everybody that you ever knew in high school and kindergarten are on the tennis court with us.
Yeah.
So I really love it because of those like very human reasons. And in my world, where like going through COVID and just kind of seeing like our human family feel disconnected, when I go to the tennis community, it's like it's just there. Nobody talks about politics. Nobody talks about, where you're from or where you're going. There's no small talk. You just play like kids. And I really think I love that part the most, is that it doesn't matter who you are, you're just playing tennis. And it's really fun. So Nick, I want to kind of turn it over to you to kind of lead where we go next here in the conversation. And then,
Sure.
and then we'll see what happens there. We'll come back to, just for reference, before we started this conversation, I had a two-part conversation with Nick St. Louis, the founder of the Foot Collective, and we discussed footwear and our feet and the role that natural footwear play in our development as tennis players, and injury prevention. And so I want to kind of eventually get there and like beam training, and why this conversation, which isn't very widely talked about. It kind of seems like in clusters and circles, but I think there's a real opportunity, like Nick said, for us to have more conversations about this stuff. So Nick, I want you to go ahead and take it away from here. Sure.
Yeah. I think the two main threads that I really had for you, Dave, was like, one, I'd love to understand, like, just if you could walk us through like your injury, because it sounded like you had an ankle injury, and then maybe like what you were doing before you found the Foot Collective, or maybe some things that maybe you were doing that might have been sort of counterproductive to what, now that you understand sort of how the foot mechanics and natural footwear. And then the second thread would be more, like the inside tennis and anecdotes from the people like at the highest level on what they're actually doing? Are people talking about this? Or is there actually conversations around, ankle sprains and taping and just, are people kind of taking care of their feet? I mean, obviously it sounds like Rajeev and Joe are doing some stuff, but is anybody else sort of like aware of this stuff? So those are the two threads. You can pick either one. I think we have enough time to probably hit on both.
Yeah, we'll try to go for both. Well, I think there's probably a lack of awareness on foot health. When you kind of talk about the design of these shoes, and players are at my level invariably kind of contracted to Adidas, and these are the latest shoes that we want you to wear. And Joe's with Adidas, Rajeev is with New Balance, so they kind of just have to wear what they're given for the most part. But in many cases, even this year, Rajeev particularly liked New Balance's shoes last year, whichever ones they were, and they've changed the model and they were giving him foot pain this year. So he's still on last year's model and just wearing like whatever reserved he could find. But it is, it's probably just we're behind the curve, to be honest. And I think that's maybe the same in all facets. I think in mainstream people are only just about growing an awareness for actually what natural footwear might look like, and even just health in general. So I think in many ways you'll see a lot of the trainers might be more the pioneers. So you'll see a lot of the kind of personal trainers that travel with the guys, or the physios or the ATP physios. A lot of those characters will be wearing natural footwear, and I think there will be a point in time, having listened to both conversations, Ruth, that you had with Nick, is just, people haven't had the time to adopt to natural footwear. And if one of the big guns like a Novak or a Roger or Rafa or Andy were to kind of say, hang on, I want my shoe to emulate a natural shoe and give me X and Y. But I think we're a product of our surroundings, and for their lifetime as players, this is all they've known, and anything counter to that is a bit scary and a bit weird, and no one can jump in straight away and try the shoes. I think Ruth, for the example that you gave earlier on, that you were obviously at a great base, having done so much of the Foot Collective stuff before you kind of really started to go back properly into tennis, that you're already well equipped and had better designed and functional feet and no kind of real stiffness, that you're able to do that straight away. And they're probably the benefits that you're seeing on the court now. Whereas, with my guys, and you'll see tennis players invariably have horrendous feet, like totally banged up, black nails, you name it, this, that, and the other, taping, ankle braces, you can see it all on the court. So it would be interesting to see, okay, so I'll tell you great. So Joe was, we had this biomechanic guy in working on Joe's serve, and Joe was having a little bit of pain with his back, and we had the specialist come in, and it was fascinating, but understanding the forces that we actually put through our body when playing a tennis. So Joe, very athletic, one of the most athletic doubles players out there, and his service motion and landing and then pushing off to get into his position for his first volley, let's say, the pressure that was putting on his body, started to accumulate pain and a little bit of degeneration. So we had this guy come in, and he was kind of estimating that Joe's probably putting, a ton to a ton and a half of force through his spine as he lands. So Joe's obviously got, an amazing ability to kind of accelerate into the serve, and just all the pressure that he's putting on. So it went through a big change just after Wimbledon to try and make the serve a bit more efficient. And it got me thinking, having done the Foot Collective and the Foot Nerd program, like, if we constrained him to like serving barefoot, how would that address the kind of biomechanic? Surely he wouldn't land in the same way as he does now, because the shoes obviously facilitate him to land in such a way, etc. So that was my own little thought process, and the same could be done for forehands and backhands, the different movement patterns. To give another example with Joe, when he was kind of like rotating his hips round through the stroke, invariably his feet could drag on the, like the top of his foot, the toe box would kind of drag on the floor. So we were kind of thinking, no, we want him to release a bit more purely, not get anything inhibited in the stroke. So again, if he was barefoot, he would be able to kind of pivot through more. So I think that is maybe the best kind of approach for right now. I think there certainly is a way to utilize being properly, like shoeless in training, to kind of encourage more efficient movement patterns and to help the kind of stroke mechanics. And so Joe has since done 1 or 2 serving sessions where he was just in socks and to see how that was. And it looked a little bit better, because it was just a constraint that his mind was a little bit more conscious and he wasn't, have an inch of foam to land on. So whether guys will get to a point where they wear solely natural footwear, I'm not sure. I think hopefully they do get there, but it will require, maybe a few more years, and certainly making sure they touch on all the right things and get a bit more mobility across their joints. But plantar fasciitis is very common on the tour, and you see a lot of the guys struggling with that. So I think most people kind of think, oh, insoles and this and that, so they're kind of sold that con, as opposed to maybe addressing a few more of the tangible, stuff with regards to feet and increasing mobility. But for my own story, yeah, I tore my medial lateral ligaments in my ankle. It was actually a football injury, stupidly enough. But yeah, so my ankle ballooned up straight away and had really serious kind of bruising halfway up my calf. Like, I did a proper good job on it and kind of thought my playing days were done. And sure enough, kind of found the Foot Collective, did my little, at the time I was aiming to do kind of 6 minutes on the beam. So 5 times, so 5 sets. So I try and do kind of 30 minutes a day on the beam. And I just invented, I'm like most people, I'm maybe a little bit OCD with my stuff. So I kind of had this, I do just a minute, like left foot, single leg, right foot, single leg. Then I would do ninja and then tandem, where I'd go left foot behind my right foot behind my left. And that was my circuit of 5. And I'd try and do that 6 times throughout the day. And yeah, it was pretty religious to sticking with that. During COVID, I was barefoot a huge amount. I was in London, nothing really happening. So it was rare when I was putting shoes on. And yeah, noticed a big difference then when kind of everything opened up and I went back to kind of lacing up my tennis shoes. And I was like, Jesus, these are really uncomfortable. Took the insoles out just so I had, even less cushion to try and feel if that would help. But even just how constricted, and I guess my toe or my spread and splay of my toes had improved. So the toe box felt a little bit compressed on the shoe that I was wearing at the time. And yeah, and subsequently, my hips improved, my knees had started to improve. I kind of felt like while I was playing, I certainly had a little bit of an impingement in my left hip. I had a little bit of a dodgy right knee at a point in time. But my squat had improved no end. I could, just get to end range like the program kind of said and rest there for like 2-3 minutes and it was kind of comfortable. So just exposing my body to that and just being maybe a little bit more active during lockdown, having had the time. But I guess that's where I'm quite fortunate in that I'm generally, outdoors and on the court or just active, if I'm up and strolling around or in the gym warming up with the lads or whatever it may be, I'm certainly that way inclined to try and stay fit. I want to try and keep playing Davis Cup for Ireland. So invariably I'm trying to warm up with the guys, even though they're doing whatever they're doing and I'm doing my own little thing. So that's kind of a little bit of the two there. But yeah, keep firing away questions.
Yeah, were you doing other rehab stuff like in conjunction with the beam, or was like the beam and the Foot Collective stuff your rehab protocol?
Well, I think that's probably where I saw the most benefit. I think immediately after the strain, so I only did the Foot Collective kind of 2020 into 2021. So I probably had 18 months of kind of just resting and it was feeling okay. I was seeing a physio and getting needling and doing a few different little strength and kind of towel crunches where I try and pick up the towel or, a few different bits and bobs from what I can remember. And it got to an okay point, but still very conscious of needing whatever about mentally, if physically it felt okay, but mentally I was maybe a little bit unsure and trusting it, that I felt the need maybe for an ankle brace, albeit that I found it very uncomfortable. But since kind of transitioning into the Foot Collective and, going into even that lunge where you go into end range and you put your full body weight through your ankle and working on your hip flexors and oscillating and, just that little routine that I built in, that is for sure where I saw the biggest improvement in my setup. And so much so that even to this day, sometimes my ankle can kind of like a little bit slip and it's like one of the tendons gets caught or the muscle kind of feels a little bit out of place, and I can kind of just manipulate it and crack it back in. And I'm like, oh, it's good to go again, So they crack all the time, both ankles, which I think is not uncommon for tennis players, having spent kind of 20 plus years pounding on hard courts and so I would say attribute a lot of my route back to playing professionally. I guess not even playing professionally, but playing Davis Cup. I would attribute all of that probably to my time spent doing the Foot Nerd program and getting back on the balance beam.
Wow, amazing. Dude,
Yeah.
I have a technical question for you, and you might not have the answer, but I'm going to fire away. Ruth, I think you're going to appreciate this. Do you know your ankle like dorsiflexion on your sprained ankle, like the needle wall test? Have you done that?
Yeah, I don't know that off the top of my head. Sorry.
Okay.
I could do it here real quick, maybe, and see.
No, that maybe we'll circle back. But I think that is like both Ruth and I struggle with that, and I think a lot of people do struggle with that. And for people watching, it's you stand against the wall and you try to drive your knee into the wall while keeping your heel down. So it's just it's measuring your how much ankle dorsiflexion, how much you can drive your knee over your toe. And I think a lot of people are really limited in that, and that causes all sorts of struggle up the
upstream,
in the knee, in the back, and the hip. And I know with ankle sprains, because those tendons are not really properly rehabbed, people have a lot of problems, myself included. So I was just curious if you've been able to.
Yeah, certainly when I did the program, I saw an improvement. I can't remember the figures off, but I always found myself as actually quite, muscularly quite mobile. I'd say most of my like limitations maybe came from like a neurological standpoint, but always my muscles kind of always felt limber enough, but my neurological stuff is maybe what kind of limited my flexibility at times. I remember my last proper preseason I did down in New Zealand, and we did pretty intensive yoga. We had a great instructor, and he was teaching like all the flossing when you're in these end range positions. And that really helped like a lot of my like lower back and hamstring. So I think that's one thing that maybe doesn't get kind of taught an awful lot too, as well as like, your muscles might be flexible, but how are you neurologically able to kind of adapt and get into these end range positions and hold them kind of comfortably. But I always found myself kind of as a pretty good athlete. I kind of has always been heavily involved in all sorts of sport, and tennis is just the one that kind of captured me, and that's the one that I guess I took a sense of ownership. It was always fun, being the one out there kind of competing against myself to a certain degree. And I remember being like on the football team and you do nothing wrong or you wouldn't get any of the action. I was like, that's just a bit boring, whereas like in tennis, it was all on you. Okay, you take a few losses, but you get a few wins, and that was just much more appealing.
Always part of the action. I think that's one of the things I love about tennis too. You're just in it.
Exactly.
There's no hiding.
I wanted to ask you both. So when I was talking to Nick, he has an uncanny way of holding out on the juiciest nugget to the very last moment. And I had never heard of Tim Brennan. So maybe I'm just living under a rock, but did you guys know of this guy who was a tennis player? So for those of you listening, if you're not familiar with Vivo Barefoot, it's like one of the most popular brands of natural footwear. I think known, right?
Yeah, I think they're the brand, are they not?
Yeah, I think they are the gold standard brand of natural footwear.
Yeah.
In many people's minds. So Tim Brennan is a guy who was a tennis player. I did not know this. I'm just now starting to do my research. I'm going to go in deep. because he was studying, he was playing tennis and he kept getting ankle sprains. And so he started to, I might be getting this a little bit wrong because I'm just now going down the rabbit hole. But eventually he started getting involved in the Alexander method, which is like a movement repatterning program, like neurological and just like really cool sort of movement education.
Cool.
So the teacher gave him some exercises to try. And when they would do the work together, he would be barefoot. So he would put his shoes on and then he would leave the training sessions and he said his posture changed and he couldn't feel, obviously, the feeling that the teacher was asking him to practice for homework. So he started on this engineering process of creating the Vivo Barefoot sole. And then he talked about, it's so interesting to hear him because he talked about how he would get on the double-decker bus to go to his tennis matches and he would lace up his prototypes, because what would happen is he created a foot-shaped prototype, which would eventually become the Vivo Barefoot sole. And he would go to his mat, but they would wear out quickly. The sole would wear out very quickly. So he would, on his way to his match, he would like punch holes in the bottom and then put the barefoot sole on. And then the top would kind of look like a tennis shoe and the bottom would be like he could feel the ground. And anyway, so that's as much as I know about Tim Brennan so far, but I found that to be wildly interesting that the Vivo Barefoot sole inventor man was a tennis player. Yeah. And the ankle injuries, like I think I told you in the last, when I was talking with Nick, that I'm spending way too much time watching tennis and I find myself watching how the athletes are moving. And I recently was watching a match with this woman, what is her name? Well, she's an up and comer and has a very beautiful serve and she's super strong, like super agile. And anyway, she fell off of her shoe. Like it looked like her feet were not even a part of her body. Like there was so much shoe there and it didn't seem like she should have fallen at all. She was just moving gracefully across the court and she tipped over. And then I was just watching yesterday, a guy, is his name, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's Humbert.
Humbert. Hugo Humbert, French guy, yeah.
Gnarly injury, right? Did you see him fall? He fell, he was running, and I'm just curious, because I want to ask you now about, Dave, I want to ask you about your footwear and your relationship to footwear and your ideas, because we're not trying to advocate for people switching to natural footwear in their tennis matches, but we do think there's for me, it works great because, like you said, I just kind of was born into natural footwear. But I'm watching these injuries, and I'm wondering how much of that is like a lack of being able to feel the ground, because Humbert fell, and I don't know what happened, but it looked like he just kept going. His shoe stopped, and he kept going, and it looked like maybe he hyperextended his knee really bad. No. So can we kind of take it to like, what shoes do you wear? Also, I see a spectrum, right? In the elite athletes, some like Novak's wears Asics, and his Asics are pretty, for unnatural footwear, the toe box is fairly wide and they're fairly close to the ground. So you see there's a spectrum of the shoes that people wear, and like then Rafa wears Nike and they seem like they keep getting more and more cushioned. So what do you
I think what maybe goes a little bit unnoticed, like for a lot of those top guys, I think their shoes are like custom made, like they're molded to their feet, I think. So like they're not messing around with anything off the shelf. Like I just remember hearing a story that an old friend of mine played doubles with another ex-pro, and he was, one of the young up and coming guys, and he had kind of personalized shoe, or it was taken into they were a Nike shoe and taken in, and he said that they felt like completely different to what was actually on the market. So you can bet, that's not to say that they couldn't go a step further and go a bit more, natural, as it were. But I think for the top guys, they're getting totally personalized shoes, what they may look like, but that'll be totally tailored to their foot. But I do think, how physical the game has become and how much sliding, you look at someone like Monfils on a hard court, or just all the top young guys, Alcaraz, the power, the movement, the precision, I think that's where it'd be interesting to see, if ever in a point in time, how these natural shoes would hold up, just because, would they have the ankle support, or do you need ankle support? Is that just like a myth, like where people kind of say,
this is where I think eventually we'll get Nick on here, because I think this is where he was arguing that you don't need the ankle support. Like it's like the ankle brace is like an orthotic for the ankle.
yeah.
And like, I'm curious because, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, I don't know. Like there are certainly times on the hard court where I'm like, maybe I need a bit more cushion. And then I put a bit more cushion and it hurts my knee. Yeah. So I don't know for sure, but where I was going was that the top guys who have their shoes tailored for their feet, right, are all being tailored by the people who would probably prescribe orthotics. So even though they're going to be designed specifically for that athlete, the designers are not taking into consideration that they maybe need less cushion, right? So like we live in a world where orthotics are typically the answer to foot pain and or injuries prevention and all that. So what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I think it's probably reasonable to think that short term is, like what Nick said, like on a local level, yes, they maybe make sense, but on a global level, and once you become a bit more equipped with your, musculature and with the feedback, then they probably lack. So like, and I think we're all probably prone to maybe looking a little bit short term, thinking, oh yeah, a bit more cushion. Oh yeah, that'll stop. That makes sense. I think most people are quick to just add, but when you listen to, even what Nick said, where if you go to the limit of this stuff, and if you put someone on 3 inches of a shoe, well, how's that going to look? Well, yeah, of course they're going to be like Bambi, and they're going to roll an ankle or maybe do more damage. So I think I go back to my point of, I think in the beginning, there's certainly a place as it is right now for learning how to play barefoot, and for, creating these more efficient movement patterns off the bat. And where that will lead to, I don't know. But, when you see what, there's what some of these guys are doing, there's a shot that was pretty heavily advertised. It was amazing. One of the best shots I've ever seen. Novak did it at Wimbledon this past year, where he was kind of sliding open stance on his backhand against Sinner in the quarterfinals, I think it was. And he ends up on the floor, but he's sliding on a grass court, which is notoriously hard to do. So just the trust, and it's incredible. I'll try and send you the clip via email after this, but you could get it, I'm sure, if you just typed in Novak. But he basically sliding way out to his backhand. He's in the tram lines, hits a passing shot, and like from his upper body, from his knees up, you would look like he was the most unbalanced person in the world. And then he like hits the shot and like falls to the ground, and he's like kind of giving it this one after he hits the winner past him. So it's like what these guys are doing, and I suppose the advertising and the marketing from the shoe company is that, oh, this is exactly what you need when you're doing highly excessive kind of movements out in the court. These shoes are durable and they can kind of bend a little bit, and the soles on them are great. I suppose that's the narrative that they're spinning to the players. And sure enough, if you see Novak doing that kind of stuff, you're like, yeah, Christ, these shoes must be great, but he is an absolute string of spaghetti. Like his level of athleticism is, just second to none. So the stuff which you have to understand about him, and having been around the scenes and seen him warm up countless times, and the boundaries that he's pushing. Even I saw a press conference of Ivan Isevic's coach saying that I think he did like 77 or 72, 70 odd like biofeedback sessions, or complementary medicine, let's say, in order for him to get his hamstring in the right place to be able to contend at the Australian Open. He went ahead and did that. Like, from what I've seen him warming up, he's so dedicated. Like every waking second of the day is kind of, it's dedicated towards how he can be a better player, a better athlete. And it's just amazing to see. But yeah, the stuff that he's doing in the gym, if it's, I've once seen him put on these goggles that kind of like diminish his eyesight. So I think they like kind of, I don't know, take his eyesight or his perception down by 60-70%. And then like he's getting fed, a tennis ball, so he's got to be in the right, so that's where most people don't train this, but like your reception skills, I guess in tennis you're 50% hitting the ball, 50% receiving the ball, and no one probably trains that kind of stuff. So I guess that's where he thinks there's a little bit of an edge. So as soon as the ball comes off the opponent's racket, he's picking it up, he's tracking it with his eyes, just all those little 0.5%, which for him make a big difference. I think for me, there's still plenty ironing out that I need to do in my game before I start worrying about picking up the ball that little bit quicker. But that's, I think it's just the narrative for the shoes that is where we're behind. We're all sold these high level athletes wearing these shoes, and we presume if it's good enough for them, then it must be good enough for us. Where is there, I think it makes sense that, like we said, your feet are for proprioception, they're searching for feedback from the ground. So if you deny them that, then you're probably going to be landing a little bit heavier in your serve, which is going to send more shocks through your body because maybe you're landing a bit rigid, and that's what's maybe going up the chain, causing the knee or the hip. And even in Joe's instance, he was getting a pair of shoes, and Adidas said, this is where the shoe companies are a little bit odd. They obviously are always, pushing for new models. And in this one particular year, Joe had transitioned from their old model to their new model, and straight away, knee pain. Whatever it was with the new shoe, just straight away in both knees, knee pain. Had to go back to the old shoe, and they were fine. So even, I think if you were to really dig a little bit deeper as an athlete into that, you kind of be like, hang on, what's happening here? Like maybe there's a better way, maybe I should take, and both guys are actually good about being barefoot, even when Joe's in the gym at the NTC, the National Tennis Centre here in the UK, it's generally all, he'd be wearing his socks now, but it's generally all kind of barefoot. And I think there is a growing awareness from these PTs that are thinking, there's 0.5% to be had in having stronger feet or a bit more robust ankles. And so I think it is naturally getting there. There's so much at stake for this not to be the case, that there's so many millions to be had, that if you are that little bit better and you're that little bit stronger, and I think just traditional strength and conditioning hasn't caught up to maybe how we view the body yet. But I do think it's growing from what I see, and for people, addressing stability issues and how they're doing that, which is so fascinating. When I'm in these gyms, and sometimes I'm just observing, and these guys all have different routines. It's amazing. They'll have something similar, maybe for the hips, maybe for the shoulders, and then everything else looks totally different for each and every one of them. It's fascinating to see how, even in that aspect, the variety that you can see is, and how personal it is towards their bodies and their trainers, and what they feel they need to be at their best. But I think for the time being, the mainstream companies haven't caught up to the benefits of what natural footwear looks like, and how it could maybe benefit these top athletes that little bit more.
Have you had, like you mentioned, you had a conversation with Djokovic's physio? Like, have you had conversations around some of like the rationale between like why they're doing
this? So he came over, and this was actually in Turin, and so I'd seen him in Paris, and I wouldn't be shy of just throwing my bean down on the floor and just jumping on it before I'm going out. Wouldn't bother me. And he was like, came over, inquired about it. But the lads actually lost that evening. But he was like, oh, next day, can you come bring it and I'll take a look at it? And I was like, yeah, fine, yeah. So it bled into Turin, and he came over and took a look at it. And we had a little bit of a conversation. And I know I've seen Novak trains a lot barefoot. I think he even follows the Foot Collective. I think he's definitely aware. but yeah, I did kind of share a little bit talking about, you know, how maybe being handcuffed and adding a constraint of being barefoot and what that would look like. And talking to the, you know, Sergio, this biomechanic specialist that we had in, he kind of actually was like, oh yeah, that would be interesting to see, because, you know, much like what you know, the foundation of the Foot Nerd program is, if you're like running on your heels, and it's like putting the handbrakes up, whereas if you're, you know, on your forefoot, then you can use your Achilles as a spring, you know, in the same sense. I think the way Joe was landing on a serve was so heavy that if he was then barefoot, then it really helped him to try and like understand that, to help his body understand, oh, actually, no, this is the pattern that I want to get into. It's more efficient, and I can spring off into my first step for the next volley better.
Did either of those people that you talked to, Djokovic's physio or the biomechanist, did either of them get on the beam themselves?
No, Sergio hadn't seen the beam, but Djokovic's physio was playing with it. But I've had another instance, great Canadian player Felix Auger-Aliassime, his coach, he's from Montreal, so he's from around the corner, Nick. Mm. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, it's a great Canadian brand, like you should come and check him out. So he had subsequently tried it. And, you know, in passing, obviously, if you see some fella, I mean, I'm quite tall, I'm like 6'4". So if you see some donkey balancing on a beam in the corner, you know, invariably you get a few eyes being like, what is the fella on? You know, like, what's he doing? So people have inquired and come over and tried it, and they're quickly humbled, you know, like if you try, oh yeah, try and do this. And they're like, Jesus, you're like, okay, yeah, there you go. So there has been a few people come over and kind of show an interest and what is that? So.
Well, your new challenge on the beam, Dave, if you haven't already tried it, is to get up there and close your eyes.
Yeah, I know. I've been trying. It's tough, huh?
I'm determined though, because there's this part of me that's like, well, in my little league here in the South, I'm like, well, I kind of want people to know about natural footwear, and I kind of want them to know about this.
Keep it as your secret.
But at the same time, if I can go 60 seconds on my beam, no errors, I'm going to have the edge.
Yeah, exactly. So 60 seconds, eyes closed. That's the challenge.
Yes. It's pretty unbelievable, the growth, the education your nervous system gets, like you get the genetic upgrades so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to be respectful of our time, because I would hope that you'll come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I probably rambled a little bit too much there. So
Never. Right, Nick? Did he ramble?
No, you're good. But we still didn't get what shoes you're wearing. So maybe we can.
Oh, so
I think the main takeaway for people listening is like spending time barefoot and training your foot to be healthy and strong, like, is a no-brainer. And then as we get into what we actually wear on the tennis court, I think that's a more nuanced conversation depending on level and surface and all these other variables that hopefully we'll get back, Dave, and we'll get into that. But yeah, just what are you currently wearing?
So yeah, for me right now, I've got a little deal with Adidas. So I'm wearing Adidas Ubersonic 2s. Now for me, I'm you know, like that, I'm not really spending that much time. Invariably, I'm either in flip-flops roaming around the site, or I put them on for the hour and a bit that I'm on court. But they're nice and lightweight. They're pretty comfortable to me. It's kind of like the upper sole of them is kind of like a mesh kind of sock. They are, I think they're coming out with a new version. I think they're called Cybersonics or something like that, which is a little bit different structure. But for the time being, yeah, they feel quite good. When I last played Davis Cup in September last year, I was actually wearing Rajeev's New Balance shoes, and they were maybe one of the most comfortable pairs of shoes. I think they were 996 or something like that. But they're an older model that New Balance pushed last year, but they were quite minimal. They didn't really have much of a, you know, kind of heel raise or whatever. But certainly enjoyed them, and they were the kind of shoes that I could just put on straight away, like fresh out the box. I could throw them on, invariably, and wouldn't have any insoles in them, and would just kick them on straight away and feel pretty comfortable leaping around the court.
You take the insoles out then? Because I was going to ask,
Yeah.
I'm interested in the different stack heights, right? So the cushioning has like all, I was curious when you were saying about when the athletes put on the new tennis shoe, they immediately get knee pain. And it seems to me that like the cushioning gets more, the stack height of the cushion seems to lend to like more knee pain. So I was just curious. So you take out the insoles of all your shoes?
Yeah, even, I mean, yeah, I did get custom orthotics. I got sold a lie many years ago, and invariably just used them. I didn't like them in my tennis shoes, actually, just because they were kind of leather and I could feel my foot slip. So invariably use them just in casual shoes when I just got injured, and but don't use them at all now. I just kind of whip. They're little tiny flimsy little insoles that come as stock with the shoe, so I just whip them out and good to go.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know, that was like, oh, I'll try this and get a bit more feedback, and maybe, like things, tennis players are invariably a little bit odd and creatures of habit. So when I was doing the Foot Collective, that was one of the things that I was doing, and I just kind of kept the habit up and was like, oh, this feels a bit more normal, maybe I should just try this. So
well, I think like it's important just to say we're talking about feet and balancing on a beam, but the foot conversation, the balance conversation really travels up the chain, and it's a whole body conversation in the big picture. So it's not as simplistic as it seems, just focusing on the feet. It affects everything that we do. And any closing comments before we head out, and hopefully you'll come back and join us again for more conversations, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to jump on. It's fun to chat and hear about just tennis related stories. But yeah, no real closing comments. I think for me, I just saw a big benefit in addressing getting on the lacrosse ball to start. It's funny, anytime in my little experience, anytime I maybe didn't do the lacrosse ball and then jump straight on the beam, I noticed that I wasn't quite warmed up enough, or my balance would slip as much. Anytime I kind of do, again, my OCD was like, let's do kind of 2 minutes each foot on the lacrosse ball. So I kind of go up and down and then to the side by jamming my heel in. Anytime I did that, then, obviously my proprioceptors were maybe a bit more fired and ready to go, that I could balance a little bit more effectively. And then one of the fun things that I started to do then was instead of using my hands to correct, I try and keep my hands straight down by my side. So I was just kind of forcing my hip or my ankle to be a little bit more active. And they're just I saw benefit in kind of messing around and doing that kind of stuff.
Cool. Anything else, Nick, before we say ciao for now?
No, I think I'm good. That was great conversation. Thanks for all your insight, Dave. And
yeah,
not at all. Anytime.
Some tennis coaching next time. That could be my selfish request. But
yeah, no, absolutely. If there's anything, I think what we talk a huge amount about, which maybe doesn't get chatted about on the tour, you kind of talk about the performer. I think we try and separate the player that we are and the level of tennis that we bring. How can we be at our best selves and just let the tennis do its own thing, but maybe manage our own inner chatter, and what does that look like if so that's one of the small little tools that we use. So when Ruth says she's kind of got all the emotions going on, we try and beforehand understand actually what to expect from our performer. How can we stay present? How can we not get caught up in the frustrations or bad line calls, or at our level that doesn't really exist just because we've got Hawkeye, but there's different adversities that maybe you can face, and that may depend on opponent, what we can maybe expect. So we try and go in as a team, understanding and having these goals for ourselves and these non-negotiables that we have to meet as performers. And then if that's met, then we talk about the tennis. So that's a little bit our insight as a team, and how we structure our performances on the day. ahead of these big matches.
Cool. Thank
Oh
you.
my gosh, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And until the next time, ciao for now, friends.
Cheers. Thanks.